let's begin. Let's get started. Yeah. So, yeah, welcome to the show and Grasp Talk. And Dustin, today we have Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator. So we want to interview him, about his work, profession and his background and so on. So, yeah, let's get started. So,
Well, thank
Dustin,
you.
how are you?
I'm good. Thank you guys for having me.
Thanks too.
Cool, cool, cool. So, first of all, can you introduce yourself, for the people who don't know you yet? And
hmm Yeah. So I'm PolyInnovator. That's my personal brand. I started creating content around 10 years ago when I started blogging. And so I'm more of a writer first, but then around 6 years ago, I started creating podcasts. And it took me a while to get comfortable being on camera. Like right now, I'm looking at you, I'm doing all these different hand gestures. I'm comfortable on camera now. But it took me a while to kind of get past hearing my own voice, seeing myself on camera, doing all that. And the same thing happened with podcasting. Hearing your own voice is hard, but eventually you get past it. The more you do, like literally, you just got to put the numbers in, the reps in, right? You just got to do more of them. I got past that. So I've made videos for about 5 years, TikToks for about 5 years too, as well. So like 3,000 of those. But yeah, like I've done a lot of content over my short life.
cool. Seems like you are polymath and doing a lot of things and yeah. And I've seen you are like also you are professional at information management and content
Mhm.
management and then yeah blogging and so on. So uh I'm curious, your history of, like creator history and
Yeah.
what, you said, you started, blogging 10 years ago, but what made you to become a creator or,
Mhm.
posting something or creating something?
So I think you kind of asked two questions there, mainly what started me as a creator, but also you kind of hinted towards like what kind of information systems I've used. And I think that that could
Mm.
be something we could talk about later on, but they're kind of go hand in hand. Information architecture and content management systems, as you guys know personally, they're pretty close in nature. And I noticed that I couldn't get the creative side of me out in the systems that I had used before. So I had started out on WordPress.com, which is especially back then. This was like 10 years ago, right? So it was not nearly as good. Back then, it was very limited. You had just the basic templates. I didn't even pay for it, I don't think. So I didn't even get access to the premium templates. And so I was limited to this newspaper style website. And I wanted to share my ideas. I created what I call the United Living Construct. It was meant to be like this hub of innovators. And the idea was world unity through self development. So I had topics of technology, philosophy, and self development. And so I was writing about all of that on this crappy WordPress website, and I could not get it to look as well as I wanted to. So I moved to Wix. Wix is actually kind of a downgrade in some people's eyes, even back then, because it's very slow. It's like clunky kind of thing. There's a lot of code in the background, but it allowed me to create a visual website to my heart's desire. I got probably a little too creative with it, and I probably slowed it down more. But I was able to get some really unique ideas out in front of me, like how I had the menu off to the side, and it was kind of like a nice, unique little thing there. I had my colors very vibrant and very visually appealing. However, it was slow. It didn't really get the job done, and so I had moved to I think WordPress again, but this time .org. And I used Bluehost. I made my own website, and that gave me a lot of trouble because beyond information architecture, you still have the server architecture and the actual taking care of the website, maintaining the website. And I had a lot of issues with my host. So I think I moved to Hostinger down the line. My point is, I didn't want to mess with all the server stuff. I didn't want to keep up the website, maintaining that part. I just wanted to focus on the actual content. WordPress had a lot of meta work. The way that it was set up was still kind of early 2000s style, where you had all this different meta work. By the time I wanted to get to my blog post, it'd take me like 8 clicks, or I would have to do a whole bunch of updates, something like that. All this annoyingness. I switched to Ghost CMS, which is a lot simpler. It allowed me to create. I'm skipping some steps there. I actually switched to Medium, then Substack, and then Ghost. But Ghost was the one I use now. It allowed things to be much more minimalist, and I was able to organize my content through tags, and so I was able to create a better information architecture from that. And I'll stop that there because I don't want to go on too many tangents.
Cool, cool. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's so interesting. And so you were looking for something like, the system that you can manage easily, like through in like via tag,
Yeah.
or is that what you prefer to manage content?
So it wasn't necessarily what I prefer. It was more about I can't build a CMS right now. I don't have the technical skills. And I was very frustrated as a creator because most creators come from the point of view as either a writer, a podcaster, or a video creator. And there's a lot of the big creators out there, Gary Vee, Lewis Howes, they're all three, right? Gary Vee's not much of a writer, but he has tons of blog posts, but they have all three content types. No CMS out there really supports all three. You can do custom post types on WordPress, but it really kind of changes the dynamic and it makes it really hard to structure that given the fact that it's an extra piece. It's not built into the CMS, if you will. And Ghost, whereas WordPress had categories and tags, and you had to kind of balance that out. Like, is it a category? I kind of wish, I kind of like categories because then I could do categories as like videos, podcasts, or blog posts, and then tags will be the topic. So now, in retrospect, I probably could have organized it a little bit better. But in Ghost, since everything's a tag, I didn't have to necessarily do that. I just had tags were just the topics, like what is the subject I'm talking about, or what is, yeah, basically. And they have private tags, so I was able to use that as like, is it a podcast or a video? And for the most part, I've been able to keep my organized content very well. I should note that the reason why it was so important is that because I'm polymathic and do a lot of different things, my topics can vary very widely. I have a ton of range in what I write about. And so I need to have that organization.
I see. That totally makes sense. And
Give me one
I,
moment.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah.
Sorry, it's super hot in here. Okay, I'm back.
oh, no worries. No worries. Cool. So you tapped into like the CMS, content management system, and like across some
Mm.
media type, like video, podcast, and blog
Mhm.
post. And that's really interesting part. And at the same time, like I'm more curious about your motivation behind creation.
Mhm.
And so what can you share us a bit about why did you start creating, why you want to create something, your kind of motivation behind content, or content creation.
I can't quite explain why I started, but I can tell you why I kept going. Because, I mean, even this past week, I went to the hospital and had pneumonia. And that's a crazy thing for someone who's 28 to have. And so this whole last week, I've been sick. And yet every day, I still get up and I try to make content. I want to make sure I get at least something done each day. And a lot of people don't have that dedication or motivation. And there's been a lot of days where I feel like I don't have that motivation. But when you look at my results, I'm still coming up with stuff almost every day. And it's not so much the fact that I have motivation, it's more of just like I have so much I need to get out there. I'm motivated by sharing ideas. There's certain concepts that people just don't talk about, like polymathy, for example. That's a subject about some. So for people who are listening, a polymath is someone who has multiple expertise and curiosity in anything, basically, insatiable curiosity. So it's not just like a generalist where you're doing many things. You're an expert in multiple fields. I often call myself a proto polymath because I'm on that journey to become one. That's kind of the main theme of my site is the journey becoming a polymath. Some people call me one, some people don't. It's really just a matter of perspective. But I digress. My point is, not enough people were talking about that. And in our history as a human species, we've had generalists throughout our entire time span. And yet, over the last 100 years, we've been so focused on specialists, become good at one thing, good at one thing, good at one thing. When in actuality, we're a species that's really good at doing many different things. We're a multifaceted species. And so I wanted to highlight that. And I mentioned the old blog that I had. That's a pretty grand ambition, world unity through self development. I thought that in order for the world to get better, each individual person had to get better for that to happen. And so that perspective is something I wanted to write about and share. Then I also wanted to write about like how do you start self development? What do you do? I've worked in fitness for the last decade and especially swimming in particular. And so teaching people fitness and self development is something I naturally do. I thought I'd translate that into content. And so that's one motivation factor as well.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing. So,
Mhm.
so in terms of like the self-improvement, self-development, so philosophy, technology, so there are a lot of content so on topic. But how would you choose a topic or article you like make as a talk?
What was the last bit there? How would I choose?
The topic to write or the article to write, or like talk about on the podcast or on YouTube. Not
Mm.
on YouTube, the video or podcast.
So it's not a matter of choosing per se, it's prioritization, which is so it's a very good question you asked there. A lot of the time people are choosing between different topics. And for me, it's a matter of I have all my ideas listed out. I have a few thousand ideas in my system, right? Which is ridiculous. But part of it was I used the content idea generator, but most of it was just me coming up with ideas that I just wrote down quickly. Like, when you're taking a shower or going to sleep, you get into that relaxed alpha wave state in your brain, which is the most creative state. And in those moments, I try to write down the ideas. I don't remember who this was, but there was like this really cool author or writer who had a lot of famous books. Basically, he really wanted to tap into that creative state. So he would sit in the chair and have like his head attached to a bell, and anytime he would fall asleep, the bell would ring. And so that way he stayed in that alpha wave state. He induced that state because he's getting tired, he's falling asleep, but then the bell would wake him up so he could write down the ideas. And that's another reason why information architecture is so important, because being able to reach those ideas when you need to. And actually something I'm facing right now, maybe you guys can maybe help me think about this, is that I moved from Notion to Obsidian, but in both cases, both tools weren't able to do everything I needed it to do. And in particularly, what I need most is being able to plan out my content ahead of time. And so I've been using this reminder plugin in Obsidian, but it's not about choosing what I need to do. It's more about just what do I need to get out the soonest, right? And like what's the most important concept? Because what I'm thinking about is creating a consistency layer of content, sowing the seeds, maybe for swimming or exercise or self-development, whatever topic I'm talking about, sowing the seeds through my basic content, and then through courses and books and maybe big long form videos, creating the actual meat of it based off of that seed that I sowed a year ago or whatever it may be.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so, yeah, this is pretty common question for creators or writers. But so if you need to make a content or like, articles or videos, podcast, you need to read a lot or listen to a lot of content. So
Yeah.
in general, so to write or to output, so what is what your like main resources so, to learn something?
Well, I will say I spent the first 7 years after secondary school pursuing self-development just extremely amount. So I spent a lot of that time learning. That's how I became a podcaster and video creator and just a better blogger, is by learning and learning, learning. I went to a conference last week or a week and a half ago or so, and that's a place where you would learn a lot. But I realized very quickly that the panels and the keynotes that they were talking about weren't going to share anything that I didn't already personally know, which sounds egotistical, but it's just a matter of fact. I spent so much time learning that I spent too much time learning, which is probably funny to you guys considering what you guys built. But I spent too much time learning, and the fact that like I didn't have enough output, and so there's a balance between input and output. And I think that I mainly just focused on meeting people at the conference rather than learning. But a conference is one way, podcasts are one way. It was a podcast conference, ironically. And then, articles and any kind of videos. I still watch videos nowadays. So, for example, Colin and Samir are two great podcasters on YouTube. And they have been interviewing huge people, Mr. Beast, the Yes Theory people. They had a mastermind roundtable of the biggest YouTubers. They released literally just like a couple days ago, and this video is like an hour, 13 minutes long, but it was all these big creators sharing their theories, sharing their thoughts. And so while I'm kind of at the point where I might be a small creator, but my knowledge of the platform is of the bigger creators, but I still don't know everything. So I want to try to learn from those bigger creators. And that's what I'm kind of going for.
I see, like learning from people who went through, like, where you are now, right? I
Yeah.
see.
Who are
And like,
past where I'm at.
the next. Yeah, I see. That makes sense. At the same time, when you are consuming some information or listening to some, podcast or, like big creators videos, and
Mhm.
I think you got some ideas, some ideas spark in your mind. And how would you capture the, like the ideas or inspirations, for the future, creation. You said, someone used something, better
The bell.
things, and so that when they strip off and they, oh, I got idea, then they write down. But did you have some kind of system in your workflow?
Yeah, so I mentioned Obsidian and Notion before, and I know I've talked to you guys about that in the past. I love using these, what's the word? Second brain kind of tools. And I used to have my Notion database where I would just add an idea to that. But when I moved to Obsidian, that complicated things because Obsidian's local to my computer. When I'm out and about, I usually go for a walk when I listen to a podcast. So I can't just like, well, I have an idea, I can write it down. So I used a mobile app of Obsidian and just copied it over. So right now, my idea capture is not ideal, but yeah, I just generally just like write it down through one of these apps.
Do you use like a physical note, or just you said an
Mm-mm.
upper note, so just
I don't like paper, so I
digital?
don't generally use physical.
I see.
Yeah, that's just a personal preference, though. Some people really love notebooks. I mean, I have this one
Yeah.
right here where it's like I do write a little bit, but like not much.
So sorry, could you tell me the reason for why you moved from Notion to Obsidian? What was
Yeah,
the
that's a
like barriers?
That's a good question. So, Notion is a more collaborative database tool, and I love databases. I moved to Notion from Airtable because I had an extensive learning database. I created my modular degree in Excel. Excel wasn't good enough. I moved to Airtable. Airtable was good, but I needed the power of Notion. So I moved to Notion and I created I don't use the term second brain. I created my own system called the PolyInnovation operating system, the PIOS, because it's a different way of doing things. And I used Notion so much, but then there was times where Amazon Web Services would go down, and so Notion would go down, and I lost access to my daily tool that I would use. Or my databases got so big that Notion was just extremely slow. It was ridiculous how bad it was at optimization. And I also realized too that I wanted to be able to use AI more. And I didn't want to use Reflect or Tana. I wanted to use AI on my computer. I wanted to have the privacy. And so at the time, AutoGPT, which is a autonomous AI tool, was you could install it on your computer locally, so that way it wouldn't necessarily send any data to OpenAI. I realized that if I had all of my data, all my content, and all my ideas and articles that I saved on my computer, I could then feed that to one of these AI tools and then basically kind of create my own proto Jarvis, if you will. Granted, I never got around to actually using the AI plugins or tools, but I moved everything to Obsidian. It took me like a whole month because I have so much data on Notion. And then lo and behold, none of the plugins that I thought would worked the way I wanted to, and then I never even used it for AI. So it's like, dang it, I just moved for basically no reason. But yeah, that was the reason why I did it, and also too, Obsidian's graph feature. Like, do you want me to share my screen real quick? Like, this is
Oh yeah,
so
please.
fast. It's so fascinating. Just real quick. Let me close this. So as you can see, it's already still expanding out,
Uh-huh.
and this
Wow.
is just these are all
Wow.
the articles that I saved, right? And then these are a lot. Oh, that's not what I want. Well, you get the idea. All these different connected dots are different nodes. All the green ones are tags. It's kind of crazy. And the 3D version of this is even more insane. But that's part of why I moved too, because I wanted to see how all my data interconnected.
So I see a lot of people using Obsidian or like those kind of like visualizing like nodes and
Mm-hmm.
dots, so like this. But how did you use that Obsidian, a
How
visualizing tool? Do you use? Yeah, how
how
and when?
how useful? Well, there is a couple plugins that are like called Journey or something like that, or Smart Connections, where it'll you give it a start point and an end point, and it'll give you connections in between. So let's say that I want to write about self development. Well, there's this article that I know I really like that I have saved that I think will be good to help write it. There's also this article, and then the tool will give you a journey between different articles, maybe like 5 different things. So you chose this one, but the tool gives you 3 more. Then you can use all 5 to create that new article. And so that's one way that that kind of graph could be useful. I haven't quite done that much. Ironically, I don't need new ideas. Like I mentioned before, I have way too many in the backlog, and I'm behind on that trajectory because of my creator journey. The choices I've made as a creator has put me behind in some areas and ahead in others. And so I have kind of a backlog of content that I need to get out there. I still feel behind, basically. And so that's why I was saying I need a tool to help me plan out my content so I can try to get it out as quickly as possible. I can't burn out. I have to make sure I don't do that, but I also need to make sure that I have a solid plan. I need to see a calendar of content. That's why I'm thinking about I might move back to Notion at least for my content plan because I want to be able to have that calendar view. And Obsidian's calendar kind of sucks.
I see. So and you, but at the same time, you tapped into the AI tools. Like you care about privacy, but I think what you mentioned, like planning or thinking like
Yeah.
about like headlines, for the future content. It's like AI can help, like a generative AI can
Yeah.
help, and like
Especially if I didn't know what I was going for. Sorry.
I see. So I'm curious, do you use any AI writing tools or AI tools for your
Uh,
in your
I
process?
spent I spend a lot of time with AI tools, my friend. I don't use them in my actual creative process. Like I don't use them to write articles, for example, but I've played around with Surfer SEO. I played around with Jasper. I was actually looking into AI writing tools a year or 2 years ago before the whole explosion of all these. There was like Articulo or Writer or Surfer SEO, and then of course Jasper that everyone knows too at this point. I was looking at those tools like 2 years ago. Actually, probably longer than that because some of them have been around for a minute. But they weren't necessarily using ChatGPT yet. They were more doing their own thing, I think, and they weren't really that good. And I'm a writer first. Like when I make a video, I generally write about it first, and so that's how I make my videos. I just use those as bullet points. I tried doing the whole scripting thing for YouTube and it just didn't work for me. Right now, you're asking me questions. I come up with it on the spot because that's just how I think. I need that improvisation, and writing gives me the time freedom to be an improvisation person. Uh, but you might get a kick out of this. So, the last 2 days of last year, so that's December 30th or whatever, I finally get around to playing with ChatGPT. I had a whole bunch of friends tell me, "Oh, you should play around with it. You should play around with it." And I think I looked into GPT-3 before, but I never actually used ChatGPT. And at that point, I was asking it things about like polymath and things about self development and content planning. But there was one thing that really exploded for me. I have always been a video game person. I've always loved gaming. One thing I loved doing was playing Pokemon. And growing up, I would take the little sprites, all the little 2D characters from the games, and I would edit them. I would enhance them, I would revamp them, I would make my own sometimes too. I even made my own world maps as well. But I was never really good at like making them from scratch that well, but I could come up with ideas really well. And I thought about like, hey, I want to make my own Pokemon fan game because there's always those tons and tons of those fan games out there. So I came up with my own Pokédex. I came up with my own ideas and my own region. But using ChatGPT, I was able to flesh out the ideas. It didn't come up with ideas for me. It just took what I had already and fleshed it out. And so I was able to start coming up with ideas for trainers and story, the plot, the world. I changed all the names from Pokemon to Phasivos and all the different kind of terms. So instead of like a professor, I have a phasicist because these creatures come through phase rifts. I was coming up with my own IP, my own video game series using ChatGPT, being able to flesh that out. And I'll stop here in a moment, but I was able to use AI image generation tools to come up with Pokemon beta designs as well. So now I have like 500 beta designs. I only using like 100 of them in the first region. But my point is, I used AI for the ideas for the plot and the quests and all that jazz. I also used AI to come up with the beta designs for the creatures. And I even started playing out with the video and music generators as well. But those aren't as good yet. So yeah. Yeah.
I see. It's more like for entertainment, right? And purpose, I think.
No, that's professional purpose because this since this
Oh,
game is my own IP, I can release it. Like
I see.
once I modify them to be a little bit more consistent in style, and I can because I'm gonna take all the beta designs because they're all different kind of styles and shapes. I'm gonna make them all one consistent style, either by using human or using a better AI down the line, and then I can turn those good designs into sprites because that's something I can do. I can take the pictures and turn them into little 2D characters. And then I could also animate those and put them in the game. I started actually it started sorry it caused me to start learning how to develop games using like the Godot engine. I looked at Unity and Unreal, but they weren't as good. But the Godot engine, so I started like learning game development and trying to figure out how I could make this game happen throughout the entirety of January. That's part of why I'm behind this year because I spent the whole first month doing something else. But yeah, this is a game I can actually make and sell and put it on like Xbox or PlayStation or whatever because it's my own IP. Yeah,
That's
sorry, I
very
nerded out there.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, see. How about like using ChatGPT for like blogging? So do you have plans to do that or not? You have
I have a whole series planned,
no then.
but I have to
By
get
the way,
better at
so
development. Huh?
I mean, so yeah, you are like gaming a IP, so like you're planning and developing it. So do you have any like real plans to release it?
Yeah, I just need to learn how to develop better at this point because coding is not something I've ever been good at. That's why I couldn't create my own coding content management system. I actually actively thought about how I would make my own CMS because I got so tired of being a creator of multiple format types and not no CMS was able to handle that. Right? You could sometimes you could do blogs and podcasts, but they would never include videos too. And I also forgot to mention earlier that I have a series that I do, my main series, the Poly and Content series, where it's a video, blog post, and podcast all in one. Every episode is all three. Excuse me. And I consider that a separate content type. Since it's all three, it kind of acts like a fourth type. And so there was no CMS out there that could do all four, let alone help me with content, social media management and stuff like that. And so I need to learn to code probably is the biggest thing because I think that's going to help me a lot when it comes to making that video game or that content management system. But yes, once I can get the coding down, I plan on making that game a reality.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting plan. Yeah, looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah.
But so you mentioned that you are using Ghost, like Ghost blog.
Yeah.
You don't need to code it. So you are
So
like if you are in like paid plan, so you can adjust it by coding.
yeah. Okay, so I know HTML and CSS and a tiny bit of JavaScript. I can code a little bit, but I could never get past that. I tried learning some Python and it started sticking a little bit, but I could never learn any of the harder languages, any of the deeper languages. And Python's still something I kind of want to learn because I still want to maybe make my own proto Jarvis kind of thing. Like I have a lot of ideas that I could make if I could just learn to code. I have the ability to make these things a reality. But I've tried learning to code more than 6 times in my life, and it hardly ever stuck. Like the only reason why I know HTML and CSS and JavaScript is because I learned it like 6 times, 5 times, and it just eventually some of it just stuck. And then the JavaScript and Ghost is actually a custom framework called Handlebars, and it's a very simple framework. It's one of those things where I was able to pick it up pretty quickly. I'm using a custom theme that was off GitHub, and I heavily modified it myself. But it's one of those things where I mainly just had to copy and paste a lot of things. I didn't have to. That's probably what a lot of coding is a lot of the time too. But I mainly just had to move things around, and that was about it.
That's it. Yeah, that's also interesting. Yeah, ChatGPT will help you so how to learn code. So yeah,
I tried using
so
ChatGPT to code too, but that wasn't super successful. But I mean, maybe now that it's getting better.
yeah, should be. So you mentioned that so you are like doing like interviewing and podcasting with other professionals, right? So who are that your guests and what kind of topics are you talking about?
So most of my content falls underneath this polymathy umbrella. But underneath there, I have my different phases, whether it's self education or content creation, swimming, gaming, that kind of thing. Those are kind of my main topics that I talk about. And my first season of my show was all solo cast. I actually just wrote about this today on like a Facebook group because it was really fascinating to me. When I started doing interviews, I had already been a podcaster for 3 years and I had essentially 3 podcasts, but they were all basically the same for the most part. So I had my Polycast, which I had 2 episodes of, And I was literally talking about self-education because my first phase for PolyInnovator was around self-education. So my first 100 pieces of the content was all around that topic of my modular degree, my self-learning, that kind of thing. And then I had that old blog that I mentioned before, the one that's around self-development and world unity, that had its own podcast, and I was around 17 episodes there, or 16 episodes, but that was mainly self-development and philosophy. And then I had my fireside micro podcast, which was something that I came up with because I wanted to have like, hey, if I have a random idea, instead of writing it down, I want to talk about it, right? And so I came up with these 3 to 9 minute episodes and made it into a thing. Well, I only had 2 episodes in my main podcast feed, and I started doing these interviews or started talking to people about interviews. I'm thinking to myself, if they look at my podcast and only see 2 episodes, they're gonna think that like I'm not good. They're gonna think that I'm not experienced. And while I wasn't super experienced at doing interviews, I was experienced at podcasting. And so I thought to myself, well, basically all 3 of these shows are essentially the same topic, and I'm not continuing the United Living Construct one. That one's not continuing. The Polycast one, I'm mainly doing interviews for, which means the only separate one really is that Fireside one. I thought to myself, well, I could do the Fireside small micro episodes and then the interviews side by side. And so I combined all 3 together into one feed, and I totaled out to be like 42 episodes, which there's a old American movie where 42 is the meaning of life. And so I thought, okay, 42 is a good number. That's my first season. The next season, I'll start doing interviews. And from there, that's where I kind of started. And so I talked to people who are multidisciplinary. So basically, people who do many different things. I talked to them about their life. How do they do their life? And yeah, like from there, it's expanded a little bit. Actually, after the conference that I just went to, I actually refined and restructured my show a little bit. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I see. Interesting. So before the 2 episodes, so do you have any advice or tips for like aspiring interviewers so to talk about the topics or how to get episode from them, or like what kind of topic, what kind of like general question are you asking so to start a conversation with them?
So one thing I learned early on was that preparation is key, right? I had always known that I wanted to do interviews. I can't explain why, but I would see Gary Vee and all these other creators do these really cool interviews with these really cool people, and I was like, I want to do that one day. Same thing with keynotes, like doing presentations on stage. Like I saw that, I was like, I want to do that. And so both of those 2 things I knew I wanted to do. I just didn't know how I could do it. And as soon as I got my first guest on the show, I started doing research, right? I started learning a lot. Lewis House had a really good video, and I wish I could find this again. I need to save it somewhere. I think I might have, but I don't know. Basically, he talks about the pre-show is the show. So what you do before the show is what makes up the show itself. And I love researching. I think you guys could probably understand. I love digging into rabbit holes and stuff like that and finding out all the little key details about a certain topic. Well, that topic could be a person. And so what I usually do is I get my person. I usually do a Google search. I also go to their websites, whatever links they give me ahead of time too, or whatever links I know of. I open up all their links. I look at all their profiles. I scroll through their Instagram. I try to consume at least one content type fully. So if they're a YouTuber, I check out almost their whole channel. If they're a blogger, I try to check out their whole blog. Now, with people like me, where I have 500 blog posts, you can't quite do that. But you can at least check through, scroll through, see their biggest posts, look at those, that kind of thing. Sometimes I had guests that were researchers, so I read their dissertation. Whether or not I understood it fully, I can't say, but I tried. Or I read their book, something like that. Now it's kind of hard to do when you have so many guests, but it's something I try to do very well. I try to do a deep amount of research, and then I make my questions from that. So I usually have too many questions, which is it's better to have too many than too little. And then by the time they're coming on the show, I sent them the email with the questions and the link to the video chat the night before or the day before. And that way they don't have too much time to prepare. I don't want them to over prepare on the questions. I just want to send those questions ahead of time in case one of them is not good. Like, oh, I don't do that anymore and I really don't want to talk about it. So could you please take that off? So yeah, that's only happened to me a couple times, but it's just important to make sure they feel comfortable. Or maybe they're just like, I just need to see the questions so I don't worry in my head. And then when I first get them on the call, I'm like, hey, we're not recording yet. Don't worry. Have you gone to the bathroom? Do you need to get a drink of water? You want to have a chat first? Sometimes I just have a chat anyways with them. Like you and I started talking for a few minutes before we got started. And then we start recording. And if they mess up, I edit it out. But that preparation beforehand is what makes the episode so juicy.
That totally makes sense. And thanks for the advice. And yeah, we wanna follow that, advice. And yeah. So by the way, this is, the question from my curiosity. But
Mm-hmm.
you know, what's your thoughts on the current degree systems? Let's say, people are pursuing MBA or master's degree, whatever, but it costs a lot. And I think, there are so many nano degrees, or
Mm.
micro degrees, and I think this concept is resonate with your kind of polymath, concept too, right? And so what do you think the, future will look like, in education space or degree system? Do you have any
So
thoughts on that?
don't have any thoughts on that, bro. My whole first phase was around this. If you look at the first 40 videos of my channel, it's literally talking about courses and micro credentials. Uh, so yeah, it's a perfect question. What I'm saying is that I think that it's going to become more and more modular. That's why I created the modular degree, right? This do-it-yourself degree system, because I think that it's going to be bits and pieces of a lot of different things. You could take an MBA, sure, or you could just go to $100mba.com and do that. Or you could go to No Pay MBA, which is another website where a girl literally made her own, not a girl, a woman made her own education, MBA education using courses, just pure courses. And so she literally got all the topics from like Harvard, like the syllabus. Okay, those are all the classes. I'm gonna find them on Coursera, and then she made her own MBA. And I kind of did the same thing with my own education, but mine was way more vast. I didn't have a particular topic. I wanted to learn about smart city development. There was no degrees on that subject, so I created my own. However, it eventually shifted to be more podcasting focused and then content creation focused. And then how do I active listen? How do I interact with people really well? Those are the different subjects that I taught myself in my own modular degree. But the key word is modular. My focus, my need for learning shifted. I did not need to learn about, smart cities anymore because that wasn't my focus at that time. I needed to learn interpersonal relationships. I needed to learn podcasting. So that modular degree changed to what I needed. And then when it comes to micro credentials, I think there's still not nearly enough of them yet. The one that I really think is fascinating is by MIT. There's actually two of them by MIT, where if you take this micro masters that they have, you don't have to have any college history. As long as you take that micro masters and pass, you can go straight into a master's degree in MIT, which is fascinating. Like you don't have to have a bachelor's to get a master's degree. And so I was actively trying to take that course. And you know what stopped me? I didn't know R programming and I didn't know statistics. Two very, I want to say hard, but statistics is hard. R programming is probably not that hard, but two dense skills that I needed to learn on my own. So I started learning a little bit about, data science and try to shift to that. Eventually I stopped pushing for that. But my point is that if you take that micro credential, you can take it into a degree directly, and it would be a lot cheaper than doing 4 years before.
Yeah, totally agree, and that's impressive. Yeah, and that's a great path. And like just not diving into MBA or master's course, but before that, prior to that, they can acquire some like micro degrees, and then they can decide if they want to go or not. And yeah, that totally makes sense. And in that sense, knowledge itself is like distributed and on the internet, and people can get whatever they want to master or learn, and they
Mhm.
can learn on the internet. At the same time, some people say still, I by the way, I totally agree with what you mentioned. At the same time, some people say, still, if you go to school or real master's program, and network is the biggest, like takeout, from the
It's
master's,
not what you learn,
program.
it's who you
Or
know.
mhm, mhm,
Yeah.
yeah, and or yeah, like, but real experience still, is better than like a degree itself, credential itself. What's your take on these things?
Well, I was gonna say, like, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. The delay is kind of weird, but it's not what you know, it's who you know, right? And that's why when I went to the conference a week ago, I didn't really pay much attention to the panels. I didn't really care about what they were talking about on stage because I already knew half of what they were going to say. And that was because I spent so much time learning on my own. And again, that sounds egotistical, but it is true. Like I basically knew most of what they were going to talk about. And I figured too, I could probably listen to the panels after the fact, which I don't know if I can or not now in retrospect, but ironically, I thought I could listen to it afterwards, and so I focused mainly on just connecting with people. I met like 1,000 people at the conference. That's a third of the conference. I spent the entire time networking because that's the most important thing. Same with college. It's not what you know, it's who you know. Ironically, a lot of the times the people you meet in college don't always really matter because they're either academics, which means that they're only going to be able to help you in academia for the most part. That's a generalization, but or they're just fellow students and they might go in a whole separate field. So, ironically, meeting people in college is not necessarily the most important thing. I've met better connections in person, like PhD people in person. I have a neighbor who's a PhD person. That connection is way more valuable than maybe up here in my Psych 101 class in college. Also, social based learning, too, I think is a very important thing. Me and Kai have talked about this quite a bit in the past as well. Obviously, with Glasp, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to have that more social based connection. Like, hey, they highlighted this, maybe that'll help you out. And with my modular degree system, which me and him were talking about too, I've tried to think about it in peer-based learning as well. Like, hey, if I make my modular degree about podcasting, and it's just that short little mini degree that I made about this particular topic, I'm no longer doing it because I finished it. I don't want to add any more to it anymore. But I have this podcasting micro or mod degree right here. Well, then you guys started your podcast, right? Now you want to learn more, you can take my modular degree. You can just be like, hey, that's cool. I'm going to learn from it too. I'm going to add this and this and this. And boom, I take it. And that's kind of a peer-based kind of system.
That's really interesting concept, and yeah, we're gonna do that, and that's great.
All right, don't be stealing my idea. No, it's fine.
Yeah,
I need to make
yeah,
this platform. I want to make
yeah.
this platform so bad. I just don't know how I can do it. That's why I stopped working on that first phase of education because, or like the modular degree, because I did as much as I could. I created a Notion template for people to download and use and make their own modular degree. But from there, I can't really make this platform a reality just yet. And so I can't really do anything with that phase. So that's on the side burner. That's on my like that's on the back burner, so to speak. And then I focused on doing interviews. While I don't consider interviews a phase, it kind of took all my focus in that time. And so my phase shifted, and then I started doing swimming content. And then, ironically, all these AI tools came out, all these content repurposing tools came out. So even though I was focused on swimming, I had to kind of split my focus between swimming and content repurposing because all these tools came out and no one was talking about them. And so there was a perfectly blue ocean niche right there that I wanted to tap into. So I'm kind of juggling a lot of things this year, but yeah, hopefully I can get back to that first phase at some point.
Mhm. I see. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Thank you so much for sharing so many things. And sorry, Kay. Sorry, if I think we asked most of the question we had today.
Sure.
You know, yeah.
I'm just getting warmed
So,
up. Come on now. You got one more in the
okay.
chamber.
So, but so in modular degree systems, so how do people prove their like expertise or professions or their learnings? So for like foreigners for job interview or whatever, because
I don't think I
yeah,
understand. I don't understand the question.
also how people so how do people prove their like learning
Proof.
experience so expertise profession so in modular degree system. So if it's a bachelor degree, so you got a master of some science or something. But if it's like micro credentials or like modular degree system, so do people consider so those degree as them as like standard master or bachelor degree?
Probably not, but do you guys have a degree in business per se?
No,
No. Do you have a degree in web development?
no,
No.
just
But
certificate. Yeah, yeah.
that's my point. You guys made a great website, great user interface. You obviously know web development really well. You have the proof. I'm looking at it right now. I have the website up right now, right? Obviously, you know web development. You're creating a business here, technically speaking. While you might not be charging for Glasp, you're creating some sort of content business around Glasp in order to generate income for the product. Or maybe you should be doing it if you're not already doing it. But my point is, you have business and web development, despite the fact you don't have a degree, right? That's your proof right there. For me, my proof is content. I've always kind of talked about this too. Gary Vee really drove this home for many years. Document over create. So document your journey, creating this website, creating this brand, creating this company, or maybe document your journey doing some kind of self-development. And by making content, doing that, it's showing your progress. And so that's why the first few videos on my channel are me documenting my journey through my modular degree. Now I stopped making that content because my focus shifted from my modular degree to helping others create their modular degree. And perhaps I should have kept that content going. But for the most part, by creating content, like, hey, I learned this today, so I'm going to write a blog post about it, that shows that you had learned it and people can see. That's more valuable than a piece of paper saying that you took 4 years at Harvard or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, I think that's all from me. If Kazuki wants to add something.
Well, do you guys have any questions about
Do,
podcasting? I figured that you guys are getting started with podcasting. Perhaps maybe I can answer something like that too.
So is that more like platform or something?
I was saying this podcasting in general
I,
because you're
I
making a
mean,
podcast.
yeah, okay. So yeah, do you have any advice or tips, yeah, to grow our podcast?
Refine your, what's the word I'm looking for?
Concept topic?
No. Hold on. Give me just 1 second. Refine your pre and post, right? So I talk about the pre-show a lot, but also the post-show as well. Keep in touch with the contact. Like you guys did fine with me. I got the emails and we messaged on LinkedIn or whatever. But like, hey, if you're running behind on your schedule, tell your guest that. Like, hey, I'm running behind. Sorry, just wanted to let you know, that kind of thing. Or if you want to get them to share, like I'm obviously going to share the show and I'm going to put it on my list so I can put it on my website, that kind of thing. But that's because I know how to be a good guest. As a host, you can make clips out of this video and then send me just a few clips saying, hey, here's something that you said that was really cool. Can you share it on social media and tag us, right? And by providing the clips ahead of time, don't just ask me to share, but give me something to share. That puts me in a framework to be like, hey, I don't mind doing that. It's an awesome clip. I'll totally share it. And that's something I need to get better at. Marketing is not something that I am good at doing. I'm just not been good at doing it. Basically, I know how to market. I just haven't been doing it myself. So I'm giving you advice to help as well. But then, like, create kind of a pattern. That's the word I was looking for. A pattern for each show. Have your intro, like, hey, welcome to the Glasp show, or something like that, whatever you want to call it. And then at the end, like, hey, welcome to the Glasp show. I'm Kay, I'm Kazuki. This is Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator. Let's get on with the show. And then at the end of the show, be like, hey, thanks for coming on, PolyInnovator. I'm Kay again. This is Kazuki. This is this show. Like, tell the audience what the show is so that way you have that consistency. And then, have the outro. Like, I always ask the same question at the beginning. Share something about yourself that no one knows about you because it helps break the ice, right? It makes people feel like, oh, that's kind of a hard question. But as soon as they answer that hard question, everything else is easy from then on. At the end, I ask, like, what's the call to action? What do you want the audience to do or whatever? And that helps just create kind of this full circle.
that totally makes sense. And then we should like interview you and learn from you before we interview you. And yeah, but we could still do, the post part, you mentioned. And yeah, we can share, some snippet with you. Then, ask you to share. I mean, not share, but, we prepare something, for you
Yeah.
to spread words. And
Preparation is
that's
key.
great advice. Yes. Mm.
I think you guys did a good job. I just wanted to mention like what you could do in the future.
No, thank you. Yeah. So in that sense, do you have any like a general advice, whatever you haven't mentioned today, or but you want to tap into in this interview?
So that's a good question. It kind of reminds me of a question I used to ask where it's like, hey, is there anything that we talked about or that you wanted to talk about that we didn't do today? So that's a good question to kind of wrap up with. For the most part, I mean, I really like talking about podcasting and content creation. And I think that a lot of creators focus too much on one type. So I was a writer, right? That's my main one. People see me as a podcaster or a blog or a video creator, but I was a blogger first, right? But I'm all three. I'm good at all three. I'm great at writing though. And so I make sure I do my anchor. But a lot of creators don't realize you should be doing all three. Like you should, if you're doing a podcast interview, definitely do video because obviously you're missing out a lot when you just do audio. Nowadays, I think that you really can't get away with doing interviews anymore without video. That was a concept that they talked about a lot at the podcast conference too. But it was kind of funny being there at a podcast conference. They all saw me as a podcaster, despite the fact I was a multi-format creator. So with some people, I had to correct. I was like, I'm not just a podcaster though. That's technically my podcast, my interviews is my secondary series. My main series is that video, podcast, and blog all in one. And so framing yourself and learning how to brand yourself and understand how to present what you do well, I think that's really important.
Oh, that's a great advice. And yeah, thank you so much thank you so much for taking time and, all the advice and like the feedback, on us and on the podcasting too. And yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.